First off, I want to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. If you find it difficult to gain and finish hours-long 8 to 10 podcasts per week, please subscribe to most advanced featured and accurate quick podcast summaries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can start with free trial, which lets you listen all the podcasts and later, just for the price of candy in most places. It will save you from spending 15 to 20 hours per week catching up. Here's a rundown on making Ohio tax-free, DeepSeek, DOGE, and the education crisis, featuring Vivek Ramaswamy by Shawn Ryan. Vivek Ramaswamy walked into the studio, greeted by Shawn Ryan, who welcomed him back for the third time.
Vivek appreciated the comfortable temperature in the studio, joking that it was a rare find in his line of work. The two caught up on their recent encounters, including the inaugurations and the Army-Navy game.
Shawn Ryan brought up the elephant in the room, asking Vivek if he was running for governor in Ohio.
Vivek confirmed that he was indeed heading in that direction, with a formal announcement planned for late February.
Shawn Ryan was curious about Vivek's shift from running for president to focusing on a state-level position.
Vivek explained that if the federal government succeeded in dismantling the administrative state, the action would shift to the states. He believed that the states would need strong leaders to take on the responsibilities that the federal government was currently handling. Vivek pointed out that the federal government was overstepping its bounds, regulating industries and meddling in education, which should be left to the states.
Shawn Ryan brought up a conversation he had with Eric Prince, who had changed his mindset on the importance of local municipalities and state government. He emphasized that the Constitution clearly outlines the powers of Congress, and that anything not explicitly stated is left to the states. The conversation turned to the topic of people leaving blue states and moving to red states. Shawn Ryan expressed concerns about the influx of people driving up housing costs and pricing out locals in states like Tennessee.
Vivek assured him that he didn't want Ohio to become another Silicon Valley, but rather the best version of itself. He envisioned Ohio as a hub for production and innovation, leveraging its strengths in the defense industry, aerospace, and biotech. Vivek emphasized the importance of increasing the supply of housing, energy, and people to match the growing demand. He believed that this would help keep costs down and make the state more attractive to businesses and individuals.
Shawn Ryan brought up the issue of traditional generational occupations like farming, which were being priced out by the influx of new residents.
Vivek acknowledged the concern but emphasized the need to balance the interests of farmers with the need for economic growth. Vivek reassured him that he wanted to attract people who shared Ohio's values and were committed to economic excellence, but also acknowledged the need to address the concerns of long-time residents. The worry is that the influx of new people could have a detrimental impact if the state isn't prepared. It's a valid concern, especially when considering the long-term effects. The question is, how do you slow down growth without sacrificing the benefits of being a desirable place to live? Vivek Ramaswamy weighed in, saying that it's all about finding a balance. He believes that states should prioritize being a place where people want to move to, rather than move away from. This means staying true to the state's values and mission, rather than changing who they are to accommodate new residents. He thinks that Ohio should strive to be a state of excellence, with a focus on economic and educational excellence. Ramaswamy also touched on the topic of taxes, saying that people should be able to keep what they make. He believes that property taxes are getting out of control, to the point where people are effectively renting their property from the government. He thinks that Ohio should aim to be a zero-tax state like several other states in the country. The conversation then shifted to education, with Ramaswamy expressing his concerns about the achievement crisis in the United States. He pointed out that 75% of 8th graders are not proficient in math, and 70% are not proficient in reading. He thinks that this is a major problem that needs to be addressed, and that the solution lies in prioritizing achievement in math, reading, writing, and critical thinking. Ramaswamy also emphasized the importance of physical education, saying that it's been neglected in recent years. He thinks that bringing back early physical education and the presidential fitness test could have a positive impact on mental health and military preparedness. He also discussed the need for educational excellence, saying that it's not just about passing tests, but about preparing students for the real world. He thinks that every high school senior should have to pass a civics exam, similar to the one required for immigrants to become citizens. The conversation then turned to homeschooling, with Ramaswamy expressing his support for school choice. He thinks that parents should have the option to choose the best education for their children, whether that's public school, private school, or homeschooling. He believes that universal school choice should include homeschooling, and that it's a civil rights issue. Ramaswamy also discussed the need for merit-based pay for teachers, saying that it's a way to incentivize good teaching and improve outcomes. He thinks that Ohio should be the first state to implement merit-based pay, and that it would be a major step forward in addressing the educational achievement crisis. When asked how he would implement such a system, Ramaswamy said that it's not overly complicated. He thinks that it could be done by collaborating with teachers' unions and finding a way to tie pay to outcomes. He believes that it's a fight worth picking, and that it's essential to finding a solution to the educational achievement crisis. He believes that the best teachers in the country are underpaid and underrespected, and that they should be paid more. However, he thinks that the current system, which pays teachers based on seniority and advanced degrees, is not effective. Instead, he suggests that pay should be tied to actual outcomes and merit. He acknowledges that this approach is not perfect, but he thinks it's better than the current system, where compensation and promotions are not based on performance.
Shawn Ryan points out that it's challenging to put teachers on the same pay scale, given the varying levels of difficulty in different subjects.
Vivek agrees, but notes that within each category, pay should be based on market rates and supply and demand. He also suggests that pay should be tied to actual outcomes, such as student improvement, rather than just seniority or advanced degrees. Vivek also addresses the issue of AI taking over jobs, but notes that it's not a question of whether AI will happen, but rather how we can best use it to make people's lives better. He thinks that AI can enhance productivity, but that we need to invest in training people to use AI effectively. He notes that other countries are already leveraging AI to gain a competitive edge, and that we need to do the same. Regarding the impact of AI on jobs, Vivek thinks that it's not a question of eliminating certain professions, but rather changing the composition of the workforce. He notes that AI can help reduce costs and make certain services more accessible, such as medical care. He also thinks that we need to focus on training people in artisanal professions, such as carpentry and welding, as well as in using AI to enhance productivity.
Shawn asks about Vivek's aspirations for Ohio, and Vivek notes that he thinks making Ohio a tax-free state is a table stakes goal. He notes that other states are already doing it, and that it's necessary to compete for people and businesses. He also thinks that educational excellence is crucial, and that we need to focus on delivering that in addition to economic excellence. People are still packing their bags and moving. If you have a confiscatory environment, as California does, eventually people are going to pack their bags and go, especially if they're not even getting the value out of the taxes they're paying. Shawn Ryan recently tried out Roka's new line of glasses called the Wind Down Collection, which has a proprietary red lens that helps filter out short wavelength light, making it easier to sleep. He's been wearing them in the evening after the sun goes down and has felt the difference. The conversation turns to how states can keep people from leaving due to high taxes. One guest mentions that through COVID, there was a big uprising in remote work, and people are now working from states with lower taxes.
The question is, how do you keep these influx of people from moving to states like Ohio, which has lower taxes, but they're still working in California technically because they're remote workers? Vivek Ramaswamy responds that he wants companies to move to Ohio, not just the workers. He thinks that Ohio can be the place where companies reincorporate and move, and that the state should be a regulatory economic safe zone to encourage businesses to grow without worrying about red tape. Ramaswamy also talks about the history of Ohio and how it was once a leading edge for the first industrial revolution. He mentions that cities like Toledo, Akron, and Youngstown were once the glass, rubber, and steel capitals of the world. He thinks that Ohio can be a frontier state again, but it requires policymakers to deliver on their promises. The conversation turns to the idea of creating a virtuous cycle of self-confidence in Ohio. Ramaswamy thinks that this can be done by reviving the state's conviction in its citizenship and its country. He mentions that Donald Trump is reviving America's conviction, but he's interested in reviving Ohio's conviction. Ramaswamy also talks about his plans for Ohio, including bringing a Malay-style outlook of economic stimulus to the state. He thinks that this can be done by getting to zero tax, slashing the regulatory state, and creating special economic zones in cities to spawn innovation. The topic quickly shifts to Donald Trump, who has been making headlines with his swift actions since taking office. Vivek Ramaswamy believes that Trump is moving at a faster pace than any president in modern history, and that his actions are a good thing. He notes that Trump is doing what he said he would do, and that's what the country needs right now. Ramaswamy also thinks that Trump's approach is fiercely rational, and that he's using the levers of executive power to get things done quickly and within the bounds of the law. He believes that Trump's actions are a necessary step towards dismantling the bureaucracy that has hindered progress in the past. The conversation also touches on the topic of foreign policy, specifically Trump's recent meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Ramaswamy notes that Trump's approach to foreign policy is commanding respect from world leaders, who did not have the same level of respect for his predecessor, Joe Biden. He believes that Trump is a master conversation starter and negotiator, and that his approach to foreign policy is pragmatic and focused on protecting America's interests. Ramaswamy also shares his thoughts on the Middle East, noting that the U.S. track record of nation-building in the region has not been successful. He believes that the U.S. should focus on protecting its interests and avoiding protracted conflicts, rather than trying to build nations. He believes that the U.S. should focus on protecting its interests and avoiding conflicts, rather than trying to control or occupy Gaza. However, it's essential to recognize that he has a strategy and a clear vision for where he wants to go. He has consistently demonstrated his ability to use conversation and negotiation to achieve what others thought was impossible, as seen in the Abraham Accords. This approach requires a level of courage and willingness to take risks, which Trump has shown time and again. Shifting gears to the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, Vivek Ramaswamy has been a key player in this initiative. He has been passionate about tackling the administrative state and has written a book outlining his roadmap for achieving this goal. Ramaswamy's vision involves taking a legal and constitutional law-first approach, using legislation to cut budgets in a lasting way. However, the plan has evolved to take a more technology-centric approach, with Elon Musk at the helm. Ramaswamy believes that the success of DOGE should not be measured by the number of people involved, but rather by the impact they can have. He notes that a lean, mean team can accomplish a lot in a short amount of time. When asked about surprises, Ramaswamy mentions the USAID funding revelations, which have caught many people's attention. He credits President Trump for understanding the massive waste of U.S. taxpayer dollars and the cultural issues within the State Department and USAID. Ramaswamy believes that the creation of DOGE is a brilliant move within the bounds of law. He notes that the actions speak louder than words, and the team is letting the results guide their next steps. Ramaswamy believes that this approach is essential for achieving accountability and change in the bureaucracy. He notes that the current system, where unelected bureaucrats make decisions that bind citizens, is not democratic. Ramaswamy believes that the United States is at a critical moment, similar to 1776, where the people are rejecting this technocratic, bureaucratic monarchy. However, he thinks that elected office is the best way to realize his goals, and some actions are better done through actions rather than words. He predicts that there will be continued successes and bold moves, but not all of them will be applauded by the legacy press. When asked about the initial sweep of the presidency, Vivek Ramaswamy thinks it will take around 3 to 6 months to undo the damage of the last administration. He believes that the first phase of the presidency is about reversing the damage done by the Biden administration, which he refers to as the machine that manages Biden. He also mentions that the Biden administration pushed out a large amount of money in the 11th hour, which was unnecessary and wasteful. Vivek Ramaswamy believes that the second phase of the presidency will be harder, as it will involve creating an alternative vision for the country. He thinks that this phase will require a longer-term project, not just at the presidential or federal level, but also at the state and local level. He believes that governors and local leaders will have to lead the way in reviving civic ideals and rebuilding the nation. When asked about the DOJ expanding into states, Vivek Ramaswamy thinks it's a necessity. He believes that each state should take a long, hard look at waste, fraud, and abuse, and that the capture of state governments is even worse than the capture of the federal government. He thinks that bringing the essence of restoring the 3 branches of government, reducing waste and fraud, and cutting red tape should be done at the state level. Vivek Ramaswamy also discusses the issue of DeepSeek, a Chinese AI startup that created a competitive AI system with a fraction of the investment and computing power of us companies. He notes that this is an example of the U.S. education and preparedness for the next generation, and that it's related to the fact that 70% of 8th graders aren't proficient in math. He believes that the U.S. should take this as a wake-up call and focus on improving education and preparedness for the next generation. They also use different areas of specialization, where experts trained on their relevant area of subject matter expertise, rather than requiring everyone to be an expert in everything at the same time. This approach allowed them to conserve computing power and still achieve their goals. It's a great example of American scrappiness, and it's something that should be a wake-up call for the US to improve its STEM education. The success of a Chinese startup in AI is a wake-up call for the US, and is tied to deeper differences in the Chinese educational system versus the current US educational system. The US needs to light a fire under its STEM education to stay competitive. Overcoming the victimhood culture in the US is crucial, and it's something that affects everything from education to AI to economic leadership to success. This narrative has ruined the country, and it's not just a left-wing problem, but a problem that affects the entire nation. The victimhood culture in the US stems from the Great Society in the 60s, which was built on the idea of a victimhood narrative. The narrative was justified by the fact that Black Americans did not have the same opportunities as white Americans, but it eventually became counterproductive. Victimhood became a currency, and it became more popular for people to claim to be victims. This is reflected in the way that people introduce themselves, often by talking about the adversity or struggle they have faced. This culture of victimhood is self-reinforcing, and it's rewarded instead of excellence. To turn this around, the US needs to revive a culture that rewards excellence over victimhood in all domains, from academics to sports to music and the arts. This is the America that once was, and it's the America that needs to be revived. The participation trophy culture needs to be shifted back to a championship trophy culture, and the US needs to revive its culture of excellence. This is a competition to meritocracy, and it's something that affects the entire nation. The US needs to get back to its roots and start rewarding excellence again. Thank you for tuning in. Please click follow button, and just remember, subscription is only $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.